Hello, and welcome back to the Road to 2000s. As always, I am your driver on this journey, Caleb Denby. And today is going to be a pretty interesting day. I wanted to start off by doing a little bit of gloating, and a little bit of review on the big match that just finished up here, me against Jonathan. In case you haven't watched it, you should definitely check it out. It was a lot of fun. We had Grandmaster Dennis Boros doing commentary for us. And yeah, he did a good job. Ben Simon did a good job commentating. And of course, the better player came out on top. So with that in mind, I wanted to take a look at what I thought was the most interesting game from the match. And this is actually the only game I lost. And then after this game, I wanted to go through a little bit of calculation training. What you can do to calculate a little bit better. And because I feel like that probably played an important role in this match, and neither me nor Jonathan really showed our best calculation skills. But okay, jumping into this game, e4, c6, it was a Caro-Kann. And let's actually look from my point of view here. We see d4, d5, knight c3, takes, bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6, h4, h6, and it's a mainline Caro-Kann. Bishop d2. The other option for white here is actually this bishop f4 move, when you can play queen a5 check, and it's similar positions, but black gets kind of this queen out on c7, and white is committing to c4. So Jonathan just went for the main option, which is bishop d2, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, king b1, and then this is just a useful waiting move. Kind of forces black to make a decision with this king. And in the game, I decided to go and castle kingside.
Which game was this?
This was game one, first rapid game. So what do you think about this line for black and white? Do you kind of know a little bit about it? What might be going on here? So yeah, let's just look at the position, right? So the main thing is white castle this way and black castle this way. So of course, what does that mean? What's white going to try to do here when you castle on opposite sides?
Kingside pawn storm?
Yeah, it's going to be a game of a pawn storm for white. So white's going to be trying to break open black's kingside like this, right? And a lot of times in a lot of positions where it's castled on opposite sides, it becomes just kind of a race where black goes this way, white goes this way, and whoever gets there first kind of wins the game. But in the Caro, it looks as though, white might be really far ahead in this race, right? White has already gotten this h4, h5 move in for free in the opening, right? If we go back, we can see, h4 here, it threatened to trap the bishop, so black had to respond. And then h5 attacked the bishop, so black had to respond again. And so, these are kind of two free moves for white, helping out his pawn storm. And so if we get to the current position, here, it looks as though, white's going to be ahead in this pawn storm, which is why in the Caro, first of all, white wants to push this pawn, so he moves this knight out of the way. But that's why we see this move, queen d5 in the Caro. It's not a move, black doesn't right ahead go ahead and try and launch a pawn storm with b5 or a5 or c5. He plays queen d5. So what do you think the idea is here? What is black trying to do with this move? And this is still theory. I think we were still in both of our prep.
Remove the dangerous h5 pawn?
Not quite. He doesn't want to get rid of this. Because for one thing, white could even consider playing g4 right away if the only idea was to get rid of this guy.
Pawn's also blocking the white rook.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. It might, open up the rook even further and kind of assist white in his plan. Black's idea here is much more, thematic of the Caro-Kann. As all Caro-Kann players know, it is an opening of groveling and begging on your knees, please trade with me. Please trade with me into the endgame. So my only idea here is if, say, black does do something silly like g4, or white does, I want to play queen e4 and trade queens. I want to get the queens off the board, and then maybe I won't get checkmated. One of the main moves here, I think, is c4, which runs into this. And yeah, it feels like, I'm somehow forgetting all my theory. But positions like this where the queens get traded are common. And then the line that Jonathan chose, however, wants to keep the queens on the board. So he played bishop e3 here. So he's blocking off my access to this queen. So already this puts black kind of in an awkward spot, right? And I was aware of this move. I'd kind of seen something like this coming. And so black has a few options here, and I played a couple different ones in the match, but in this one I chose the most offbeat option. So what do you think some choices here for black might be? What would your candidate moves be? So there's one pattern that always jumps to mind, right? When you see this bishop come to e3 and this knight have the ability to go here, and all kinds of openings when the pieces are set up like this, it can be a good idea just to kick this bishop away, right? And this is what I did in one of the games, and I think this move is also okay for black. But white's just going to drop back, and so in the rapid game I decided to try something a little bit different. The main move here is actually queen b5, going even further to try and trade off these queens. And white usually actually doesn't capture here, because this endgame I think is just, it's going to be fine for black. You have these doubled pawns, but these open files are going to be nice for the rooks. This pawn can usually trade itself off for a c pawn somewhere, and this h pawn is now going to be more of a weakness than an asset. So usually you would see something like c4 and a queen f5 check, a king a1, maybe c5 here. After knight h4, maybe this queen has to drop all the way back to h7. And so, I had played moves like this. I had played lines like this before. I had a few games, a little bit of experience. And I always hated having to put my queen back here, and I always ran into all kinds of trouble revolving around it. So against Jonathan, I decided to try the much more offbeat b5. So you might be thinking, okay, well, white still looks like he's ahead in this pawn race, right? He still has this pawn on h5, and you're still miles away. And you'd be thinking along the same lines of Grandmaster Dennis Boros, if you're thinking like that. Because I think on the commentary he was talking about how this move is terrible, white's by far leading the pawn storm. But, fortunately for me, white does have some issues to overcome before he can really get this pawn storm going. A lot of those just have to deal with the awkward placement of these pieces. If you notice, they're all in light squares, which means they are prime for knight forks, which they might not be apparent yet in the game, but you'll see as we go later on. Knight e5 makes a lot of sense. This move weakens this square, and knight e5 also gets out of the way to prepare for pawn storms. I go ahead and play b4, just continuing with my plan. Here we see g4. So, black really can't allow this pawn to get to g5, or else I'm in a lot of trouble. So I go for knight e4 here. We see rook d to g1. And now I kind of missed a chance to be maybe even a little bit better in the game. Black can already do something pretty interesting to liven up the game. First of all, what do you think white's threat is? If I just do nothing, what's white going to do?
G5.
Not quite g5. He's not really ready to play this yet. I can just capture it.
So we're going with F4?
F4, yeah, that's one idea, but he actually has an even more forcing way to get a g5 in. He doesn't have to wait for this f4 stuff. So I mean, what's stopping this pawn from getting to g5? It's the defenders of the g5 square. So he simply removes a defender by playing f3. So this is white's threat if I don't do anything about it. And it's this move, and then my knight has to go somewhere really dumb. If I go to g5, now I am walking into f4 with tempo. So I saw f3 coming, And the way I responded in the game was actually with rook to b8, quite obviously preparing the sacrifice. But I actually had a better way to go about it in the game that I missed. What do you think? It's a very common Caro idea. Probably the most common Caro-Kann idea. It's the idea French players make fun of Caro-Kann players for, because they take twice as long to do it.
The immediate knight c3 check.
Well, no, not quite.
Okay.
Probably this sacrifice is a little bit unsound here. It's almost very unsound in the game. It's kind of hanging on by a thread in the game. So I think white could defend, and we'll take a look at these positions after what happened in the game. But come on, what's the most common Caro-Kann pawn break?
c5.
Yeah, it's c5, right? French players make fun of you because you take it in 2 steps, and French players always do it in 1. And they say, why is your opening so stupid? You can do this in 1 turn. Why did you take so long? But yeah, just c5 here. And now the point is, what are we doing on f3? We don't want to move this knight, right? Because if we move this knight, we walk into this g5 break. But our counterplay is kind of just fast enough.
Take on d4.
Yeah, c takes d4. And now our knight's hanging, but so are all of his pieces. So I don't exactly remember how the tactics all work out here, but in the end, I think it's going to be close to equal, maybe even better for black. So this was definitely something I missed in the game. So it would have been a really great opportunity to break down white's center and kind of slow down this attack. But yeah, in the game, I did play this rook a b8 move, which is, again, just preparing to sacrifice this knight on c3. Jonathan said, I dare you to do it. He spent a minute and a half and said, that's all the calculation I need to do. Whereas I spent 4 minutes on this move, and then it took me another 5 minutes to play knight c3. So what was I doing with all that time? Well, I was calculating variations, which was maybe my mistake. Because if you look after f3, I really don't have any choice here. There's no way I can retreat this knight and go on living after g5 happens. This is probably already dead lost. So I did eventually make the correct choice, which was knight c3. But I think one of the main reasons I lost this game was I took so long to do it. I think I should have just played it much faster. I think that was my big mistake. So what happens? Well, let's see. Pawn takes, and then the easy one to calculate is king to c1. Does anybody see the mate after king c1? Mate in 1, 2, 3. M3. Every move's a check. We're not doing Kasparian yet. It's okay. So there's no tricks. You just play the most obvious moves and give checkmate.
Bishop a3.
Yeah, it's bishop a3. So yeah, I'm sorry. King c1, bishop a3, king b1 only move, rook b1, bishop c1 only move, and checkmate. So yeah, that's the game. So, of course, Jonathan plays king a1 instead, which is a much harder move to crack. Now, there's only one move here to really keep the attack going. Everything else is just kind of dead lost. So it's kind of the most obvious move. What do you think?
Rook b2.
Rook b2 is actually a little bit too slow. So white's biggest defensive resource here is he actually has the ability to get this queen in right away. And this is going to be a problem for black if these queens get traded. So this is a really convenient way for him to defend this mate threat. And queen a5 isn't really possible because of a knight c6 idea. So we need something better than rook b2, something with more tempo.
Bishop a3.
Yeah, bishop a3 is the only move to keep the attack going. And here I was actually expecting Jonathan to go for a draw because it was looking a little scary for him. I don't know how ambitious you guys are with the white pieces here, but apparently in Jonathan's head, he said, "Yeah, I'm up a knight. I should be winning," and he didn't care. Which, in my mind, I was expecting something like queen c4. I go here, he goes here, I check. And, we call it a day. I get the white pieces. I get to survive the Caro-Kann as black. It's a good time. But he had other ideas in mind. So, what's the only way for white to really keep the game going, which is what he did in the game. If you don't want the draw, you have to stop bishop b2, right? So what's the only way to really do that? Not quite knight c4. Knight c4, you're probably running into some danger. Because now after bishop b2, if your idea was to capture this piece, now you actually are being checkmated because there's no queen c4. I guess you have queen a6 or something. But let's see. I mean, this doesn't seem quite right. Something about it does not seem right. Among other things, maybe I can just double my rooks.
Looks like Jonathan is in the chat.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, better than knight c4, which I'm sure Jonathan sees the move. He saw it the first time. Yeah, Jonathan Schrantz joining us. Yeah, rook b1 was actually interesting. I was calculating that in the game, but I'm not sure about it. Let's see, rook b1, maybe I can just give this check, and then you are planning to take, right? I guess I take back. And now you're planning queen c4. Maybe this is playable, actually. So maybe I have to do better than checking you. Let's see. Maybe rook b2 here. Then if queen c4, my idea is going to be rook to b8. And I guess the point of what I'm trying to say is if you take here, I'll take back. And there was a point at some point. I'm forgetting knight d3. My idea was going to be I want to trade off one of these rooks and then play bishop b2 and go for this endgame, but it seems like I'm a tempo too short to do something like that. Interesting. So yeah, rook b1 was actually what I was expecting in the game, kind of. Well, first of all, I was expecting the draw, but if you wanted to play on, I was thinking rook b1 would be a good way to do it. The way he chose in the game was actually bishop c1, but I'm interested in this rook b1 stuff. It's probably a little bit too dangerous after this, and maybe something like this just to keep pieces on. And I'm already going to be threatening to do things like this coming up, and c5 as well. But maybe there's a knight d3 already, but knight d3, rook a4. It would be kind of complicated, right? But yeah, bishop c1 was the most direct way to kind of counter this bishop b2 idea. And so now there's only one move for black, again, to maintain equality here. Only one way to keep the game going.
Queen can take d4.
Well, you're hanging this guy.
Oh.
Yeah, and, well, I mean, obviously, not everything is clear after this gets taken, but it should be enough, right? There's even knight c4. So yeah, the YouTube chat has got it. You know, you got to play rook b2. It's one of those cases where the bishop's more useful than the rook. Because if you play bishop b2 here, let's see, I think white's just going to capture it. And you'll get a position similar to the ones we were just looking at, but now, you know, white's up a full piece instead of just having 2 pieces for a rook. So it's going to be, you know, quite advantageous for him. So we got to play rook b2 here instead. And now again, I was expecting bishop takes b2, and rook b8, and a forced perpetual. There's no way for white to really avoid the perpetual at this point. You can play something like knight d3, I guess, but you know, there's no stopping this. You can't ever take this bishop because, again, this move is going to be kind of problematic, I think. Well, let's see, actually. That'd be interesting. But, OK, I was expecting a perpetual. Instead, Jonathan again surprised me. He played queen to c4. And now, once again, there's only one kind of clever way to keep the game going for black. You definitely can't let these queens get traded right away. That'd be a huge problem. So it's a kind of interesting in-between move here. So you make a threat stronger than trading the queens.
Rook FB8.
Yeah, so it's rook FB8. And so of course, if you know the queen trade were to occur, white would look a little foolish. This bishop on c1 blocks his first-rank defense and gets his king into some trouble. So you know, I don't know if this was a surprise to Jonathan, but I feel like it might have been. Because he played queen c4 pretty quickly and confidently, and then he kind of paused for a second after rook b8. Because, I don't know, it was really the only way for black to keep the game going, and I thought he maybe might have missed it. And for the 4th time, I was expecting bishop takes b2, and we would agree to a draw. But once again, Jonathan said no, and found an interesting way to keep playing with bishop f4. And now, finally, I can punish white for his... you know, his daring play, keeping the game going, avoiding the draws. And there's actually a way for black to finally gain an edge here. You know, after a lot of awkward moves white has played to avoid a perpetual, black can finally try and gain something. So I have to threaten checkmate somehow, and I missed it in the game. I missed this whole checkmating idea. Yeah, Jonathan says he saw rook b8 the whole time. Nobody believes him. Sounds about right. So you got to be a little bit creative here.
Who's this Caro-Kann in the chat?
Ah, it's probably the real one.
We'll never know.
No, but okay. So we already saw this idea with his bishop blocking the first rank. So there's actually an interesting way you can set up a checkmating tactic here using another idea of blocking this first rank off. That's kind of the key point. So yeah, rook b8, bishop f4. So, all right. Any ideas? Any ideas? There we go. Okay. Somebody in the chat has got it. I don't know if he found it or if he had already seen the game live, but it's actually moving this rook back, which is not quite what you would expect at first, right? It's kind of counterintuitive to move your pieces away from white's king. But the point is now this bishop needs to be on this square rather than the rook. So who sees the checkmate after queen takes d5? Excuse me, queen takes d5. Who sees the big checkmate?
Yeah, sacrifice your bishop.
How so?
Bishop c1.
Well, okay, you can't do it quite right away, right? He just takes it.
With that.
It's an interesting idea, though. If only we could do it with check.
Bishop C2 is check.
Bishop B2 is check, that's correct. And then here, the incredible bishop C1. So this would have been a great way for the game to go, obviously. I'm not biased at all. Oh, and I'm sorry, we actually have to take this piece first. Because if I were to play this here, he could just capture my rook. So yeah, okay, we have to capture here. And then knight d3 looks like, the best way to try to defend. And now, of course, bishop c1. And no matter how you take, well, you can only take with the king because it's check. This would be mate. And if you go the other way, now actually it's our bishop doing the blockading. And once again, this rook b1 is checkmate. So that was a really neat checkmate idea that, I didn't even remotely come close to seeing in the game. I was already down to 4 minutes. I was starting to panic, kind of. But so in the game, I just played kind of the most natural move, I think. I just took on c2, with quite a lot of threats coming. So he went ahead and traded queens. I traded the queen back. And he played, kind of the only move, rook h2, just getting this extra material out of the way before I could do anything with it. So I captured. He captured. And I'm sorry, I should briefly mention here. White actually has a winning tactic here that both of us missed. So if you want to try and find it, you're welcome to. But in the heat of the moment, both of us were moving pretty quickly and skipped right over this. So any idea? If you'll notice, a lot of black's pieces are hanging, and there are some threats. So it's not really surprising that a tactic exists. But I guess neither of us were looking for it. We were all kind of focused on getting these pieces off the board so white could survive. Any ideas?
Knight c4.
Yeah, just knight c4. Attacks this rook, attacks this bishop. No real way to save both. If you do play bishop b2, simply king b1, and it takes advantage of the last hanging piece for black, and there's no way to save all your stuff. So don't make hanging pieces, because then stuff like that happens. But so rook h2 instead, rather. So sorry, we saw knight d3 followed by rook h2. Trade of rooks. Whoops, okay, that was the end of the game. Yep, trade of the rooks, okay. And after c2, it actually is still an interesting position, because if you look, this rook can't move off the back rank because of checkmate. This knight can't move anywhere because of queens, and also checkmate. So Jonathan was left playing with only one bishop here, kind of. So he had to find an interesting way to kind of untangle. So he played bishop f4, which was good. I realized, I kind of have to act quickly while white's pieces are kind of all discoordinated. So I played f6, and my idea was simply going to be to try to dislodge this knight before, its time had come to legally move anywhere that didn't hang checkmate. So we see bishop d2 happen. Of course, he would like to blockade this pawn, right? But once again, checkmate. So it's actually really awkward for white to try to get out of this. So bishop d2, I think, is the best way for him to do it. I continue with e5. We see bishop c3. I go ahead and play e4. And now white was actually just in time with this bishop, so now he has a square that he can move this knight without losing the game immediately. So just in time to play knight to b2. And now I can actually win the game. I have another way to win here. So what do you think? What do you think? White is up a piece and full of confidence at this point.
Yeah.
However, his confidence is misguided, Jonathan. Misguided confidence. Because white is losing horribly, embarrassingly, despite his extra piece. One could only imagine the shame white would feel had he gone on to lose this game. But okay, so let me show you what I did in the game. In the game, of course, I am thinking I have to make use of these pawns, so I went ahead and attacked this g4 pawn, and this runs into bishop g2. And now, white has achieved kind of the optimal setup. once again, all of his pieces can move again. You know, he can move this rook up and just collect this pawn. So, you know, I let him get his pieces back in the game by giving him 2 free tempi, when instead I should have opened it up immediately. So how can I just open it up? Get my rook in the game faster. Okay, maybe e3 has been suggested. And yeah, e3 is interesting, but let's see, what if white simply plays the most natural rook c2, rook g2 rather, aiming for the c pawn. Oh, then queens, you got me there. Okay, what if white plays the most natural rook c1 here? And then if c2, I think I'm just in time to take this guy without, you know, repercussions.
Queen, he takes it with the bishop.
Yes, indeed. And my rook is thankfully here to defend my knight. So e3 is not quite fast enough. Originally, that was actually my plan. But yeah, the correct move has been suggested, which is f5. So yeah, this is the only way to really get my rook in the game. And so, of course, I can hope for g takes f5, rook takes f5. And now if we try something similar, my rook can actually come over and defend this piece. And then now, you know, with this extra e pawn, I'm actually going to be creating, like, finally too many threats for white's poor 3 pieces to be able to handle. And so, you know, I think black is actually just winning here. Not really a whole lot I think he can do. It's tough to even, like, suggest an attempt at defending. Maybe you want to try something like this, but simply like rook g2 with e3 to follow, and once again, none of your pieces can really move. So yeah, unfortunate stuff for white. But, you know, in the game, as I said, I'm down to under a minute. I simply played rook g5 with the idea of f5 next, which just runs into bishop d2 and bishop c1. So not a very good move. I followed it up with bishop b4, trying to switch diagonals here. So I did get to clean up this pawn, as well as this pawn. And after the trade, I left him with this knight. And we're all going to ignore what happened on the previous turn. You guys didn't see anything. Rook e4. And it's actually an interesting endgame. So nobody saw that the knight was hanging on c4. I didn't see it. Jonathan didn't see it. Nobody in the YouTube chat saw it. It didn't happen. So okay, this is an interesting endgame. And I think actually it should probably be a draw with best play. But here I think I played a terrible move, which was king f8. So I was foolishly trying to run my king over to help defend against this pawn, when actually I should be using it to guard these key squares back here to keep white's rook out of the game. So I think if just h5, it's actually a pretty interesting end game here. Maybe knight takes h5, knight takes a5 rather, and simply h4. And you have to bring this rook back at some point. So let's see, knight c4. And if you try to do it now, you're actually a little bit too late. Maybe you have to come up here, but then this, and it can get pretty awkward if you're not careful, if you just waste a bunch of time taking this pawn. So that would have been a lot more interesting, but after king f8, I'm simply way too slow with this, especially because now my king can't guard these squares, and the rook can just come in behind. And so in this position, I flagged. Ran out of time. So an unfortunate end to a super interesting game. But yeah, that was the only one I really wanted to go over. The other ones were kind of less interesting. I hung material, Jonathan hung checkmate, and checkmate's worth more than material. So that's how a lot of those games ended up ending. The other rapid game was actually also kind of interesting. But wow, okay, so spent a lot of time on that game. But the main thing I wanted to talk about today was what kind of came into play here. All the way back on, these moves where I was playing knight e4, and already I'm thinking about these knight takes c3 sacrifices. So what I was spending all my time on, and in a classical game, in a longer time control game, what you should spend all your time on is calculating here, right? Calculating variations, trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. And so in my head here, I calculated for 5 minutes, and I got all the way actually to this position. This is a position I had seen in my head going in, and I really wasn't sure what white was going to do here. So I said, okay, I think this is probably white's best try, and I think the best white has here is actually just going to be this draw. So I'm willing to go for it. I think a draw is a reasonable result to expect going into this, and maybe he'll be dumb and try to play for more. With some line I really don't see. And so that's as far as I got in my head. But in a classical game, of course you would maybe think even longer than 5 minutes. 5 minutes actually doesn't seem like quite a lot of time in the grand scheme. But when it's a fifth of your time, it's or even like a third of your time, more than a third of your time, almost half. It's quite a lot to spend. So I wanted to talk about how can you get better at calculating. What are some fun ways to get better at calculating rather than just grinding out the same online tactics or tactics book over and over again. And one way I like to do that is actually looking at composed studies. So this is one area of chess a lot of you might not be as familiar with. It's composed studies that are meant to be, either aesthetically surprising or pleasing or paradoxical even sometimes. And so I wanted to take a look at some studies from the classic book by Kasparian, Domination in 2,545 Endgames. So I wanted to talk about what you can do to try and solve these studies yourself. And okay, ignore the winning move that was just showing the whole time.
We didn't see it.
Wonderful. All right. So I want to talk about how you can try and solve some of these studies on your own and how you can actually do them in such a way that it does help improve your calculation. So domination studies are actually pretty good for this because it helps you kind of train visualization as well. Train, the squares a piece can move to, you kind of have to be examining all of them, right? Because they're studies in domination. So that means, the piece is going to be left with no squares left to move to, kind of. It's not going to be able to do anything useful. So in this case, it's going to be a domination of the knight over the bishop. This is one of the first studies in the book. It's by H. Madison, first name unknown to me. But so let's take a look at it. Let's see how we can calculate through and try to get to the bottom of a position like this, which appears simple on the surface, right? There's only like 7 pieces remaining on the board, 8 pieces, 7 pieces. I was right the first time, but it actually can get quite deep. So you want to think to yourself, okay, this bishop has tons and tons and tons of squares right now. What can I do to limit these squares? So a move like this takes away some squares, right? But it's not going to be enough to trap the bishop. So you have to realize, okay, I need to use these pawns as kind of, threats, right? So you start thinking of, the most natural ways to go about doing it, right? So you try to push your pawn through, he takes your knight, you try to push your pawn through, he plays bishop d5. So you can calculate in your head, okay, so a6, bishop takes f7, a7, bishop d5, I'm not in time. So the most obvious plan doesn't work. So then you have to start looking for less obvious plans. So what can I do to aid my a-pawn in getting forward faster or slowing down his defense? So what do you think? Some interesting ideas. If we do something nonchalant here like knight g5, maybe black's king can actually also just join in. And if we calculate, we get here, and we're not in time, right? So once again, we've got to do something quickly. So YouTube chat has an interesting suggestion. I'm not going to tell you.
Oh.
You have to find it.
I want to pull the black pawn onto the c file.
Yeah, so
C6.
yeah, c6 is an interesting suggestion. So I'm not going to say if it's right or wrong, because you've got to calculate to find out. So what's the idea with c6?
Blocks the diagonal.
So yeah, it blocks the diagonal. So we calculated in the other line, the most obvious line where you just push the pawn, that, you know, black is just in time to stop the pawn. So if we calculate now, we say in our head, okay, c6, bishop takes f7, c7, and then we queen, right? So he can't take our knight after c6. So c6, pawn takes c6, pawn a6, bishop takes f7, pawn a7, and then there's no way for black to stop the pawn anymore, right? Because we calculate bishop d5, there's this pawn on c6 in the way. So we say, okay, so, you know, we did it, we won the game, right? But not quite. So we have to calculate in our head, okay, what's the best way for black to try to defend? He can't take our knight, that's well and good, but what can he do to stop the pawn? Just the most natural defense for black. So we're at this position in our head, c6, pawn takes c6, a6.
C6, bishop f3.
Yeah, that's right. So c6, pawn takes, a6, and then bishop f3. Is that what you're saying?
I like that.
Yeah, so bishop f3 there, and that's the most natural defense, right? So now what happens if we just push our pawn? Just a7?
Like he pushes his pawn.
Push your
Yeah,
pawn
he
away.
pushes his pawn. He's defending the a8 square, right? So, you know, already, you know, it's an intimidating book, right? 2,500 studies, but you can think about these things quite logically, right? So you see your only threats, and you can then, this is where the calculation training comes in. You look at the specifics and make sure you see all the way to the end in a very forcing line, and then, you know, try and get to the solution. So we have our next problem, right? So c6, great. We block the diagonal. Pawn takes a6, bishop f3. Now we need some other way to force this bishop off this diagonal, right? So we have these two squares covered with our king. Is there any way we can force this bishop on f3 to step off the diagonal so we can go ahead and queen our pawn? Yeah?
Why don't go AX?
Sorry? Yeah, so we were looking at this, but the bishop comes to here. So the bishop can take and then defend, right? So we're looking in our head now, looking in our head. So c6, pawn takes, a6, bishop f3, and then we want to force this bishop off this square, and hopefully off of the diagonal.
That would be the king.
So yeah, what happens if we just attack it with our king?
G3.
If king g3, what does black want to do?
He moves the bishop to the hero.
Yeah, I mean, he can actually just come all the way back, right? You know, he's got a lot of options there. So it's not king g3. We need something that limits his options.
So, knight e5 would challenge both the pawn and the bishop. Right?
See, knight e5 attacks both, but then simply bishop d5, and then we're kind of out of moves, right? We can try and hop this knight around, but we're not quite in time. He can push through, and then his bishop's defending. So I'll get rid of some of those arrows. So how else can we try and get our knight to support our pawn? And also attack this bishop, maybe. So remember, we're c6, d takes, a6, bishop f3. So it looks like somebody, Jacob Sanders, thinks he has the solution. Blitz Bounty Champion Jacob Sanders thinks he has the solution. So he might actually be on a pretty interesting track. So he was saying c6 takes a6, bishop f3. He wants to go knight g5. Okay? So everybody's on board. So what's the only square for the bishop after knight g5?
d5.
Yeah, he has to go to d5. Then I'll let you try and find his point here. He already said it in the YouTube chat, what his point was. But it's a pretty interesting one. So he wants to bring the knight over to help the pawn in the fastest way possible. So it's tough to see in your head, right? But this is how it becomes calculation training, is visualizing that position and then keep going deeper down the line, deeper down the line. So we're at bishop d5, right? And so we need to help our pawn out somehow using our knight. And so there's a lot of tactical motifs in chess, right, that prevent, pieces' mobility. There's stuff like pins. If a piece is pinned, it can't move. If a piece is, defending something else, it can't move. And so in this case, the bishop it's kind of limited in its mobility, right? Because it can't step off of this diagonal. Because what happens if it moves off the diagonal? Like knight g5, say bishop e2, what would happen? Yeah, the pawn just goes, right? So we want to take advantage of this bishop's limited mobility. So this bishop, any squares it's defending that aren't on the diagonal, they're not actually defended, right? Because the bishop can't go there. It can't capture there. So yeah, that's how you arrive at this move knight e6, which is pretty interesting, right? So we're that one step further down the line now. So of course, the bishop can't take for the same reason. This pawn just goes forward. And so, there's no arrows in real life chess, but it does kind of help us all stay on the same page here. So let's say knight e6, and then what if black, what's the most natural way for black to continue? There's a couple natural ways. So one thing would be to open up this diagonal, right? What if he tries to play c5? So on c5, what do we have? This one's pretty direct. Not quite knight takes, because then this bishop can defend against this pawn forever, and we're not going to win, right? So what happens all the time in knight endgames? You get forked, right? Knight c7, attacking king, attacking bishop. And then, let's say king d7. So we're c6 takes, a6, bishop f3, knight g5, bishop d5, knight e6, c5, knight c7, king d7, knight takes bishop. And it looks a little unclear at first, but, okay, you're studying a composed puzzle. You can safely assume that that line's going to be winning. So you can't play c5 because you win his bishop. If you want to go that extra step and calculate it out until promotion, you're welcome to. But for the sake of time, we'll just say that's winning. And so he can't take your knight. He can't play c5. So what if he just tries to run his king in? What if he plays king d7, trying to stop this pawn? So what happens? King d7, the most natural a7. What does black have there? It's the same idea we started with originally. He just opens the diagonal, okay? So I don't know if you can see that still in your head. So knight e6, king d7. Black's playing c5 here. And again, this is defended. So we can't just play a7. So we need to find some way to keep that diagonal shut down using, our knight. So what do we have? Knight e6, king d7. Some way to keep that diagonal blocked. If I were to put this position on the board, I guarantee you would find it instantly. So the point is, trying to see it in your head. See if you can visualize the black pawn on c6, the white knight on e6, the black bishop on d5, black king on d7.
Put the knight on c5.
That's right. You simply block with the knight on c5, and then the pawn has a safe path to promotion. So let's finally put it on the board. So it takes a6, bishop f3, knight g5, bishop d5, the only square for the bishop. Now this clever knight e6 with the dual threat of knight c7 and knight c5. So we'll try king d7, but now knight c5 is just in time to keep this diagonal blocked. And after king here, there's no way to stop the pawn. So, a super interesting study where, this king seems out of play, but this knight manages to do just enough against this bishop to keep it out of the game, to promote the pawn. And if you do want to take a look at this line, let's see what happens here. It'd be a great exercise to try to calculate all this out as well. Let's see. One might play king c6 here. And, okay, I guess if king c6, we can actually just run our king over. Right. So you can't play king c6. If you try king c8, trying to catch the pawn the other way, I think we simply have just enough time to capture this pawn. So, yeah, both lines end up winning, which kudos to you if you calculated out that knight fork check line all the way to the end. But, a foolish expert like me had to put it on the board. So, yeah, so this is a super interesting study. I have one more prepared that I picked out, but I thought something that might be fun is, if we can put my calculation skills and your calculation skills to the test. So if you want to give me a random number between 1 and 2,545, I'll put it on the board, and we'll see if we can figure it out here in these last few minutes. It'll be quite the test. Pick a number, Ben.
2044.
2044. All right, let's see what we got. Oh boy. Big queens on the board for this one. Should be interesting. All right, let's see what I can do here. Got a queen on a7, a king on a8, a knight on c7. Let's see, pawn on f5, pawn on f4. Knight on d6, queen on a3, king on g5. All right, let's go. Closing the book before I see any solutions or anything. This is puzzle 2044 for those of you with the book at home. So let's see. I don't even know the theme. One good thing about this book is it gives you the theme usually prior to the puzzle. But let's see here. We can already start calculating some lines, right? So we're down 2 pawns. Looks like our counterplay is going to come from where? It's going to come from this king kind of being unsafe, right? So what's the most natural way to attack this king? Let's see, we have a check, right? So I'm already calculating, okay, queen f3, there's no convenient way to block that check, right? So let's say, king b8. And then what happens if I just give another check and then try to checkmate? What's stopping me there? So I say queen f3 check, king b8, queen b3 check, I guess king a8. And then if I give a check here, then maybe he has a block with queen b8. So let's see. What can we do maybe with our queen on b3 that we couldn't do beforehand? See, it's not so obvious. I'm not sure if this was a great idea because these puzzles are really, really hard. But I thought it'd be fun to try and figure it out. So let's see. Any ideas, YouTube chat?
Who composed this one?
Who composed this one? I already closed the book, man. I don't know.
Darn.
But I can figure it out. 2044. This was composed by A, and then that's his first initial, Toger, T-O-G-E-R, in 1962. Queen c1. Queen c1's an interesting idea. So queen c1 stops black's only check and tries to make a threat somehow. I don't know if I see the threat off the top of my head. Don't know what the idea is with queen c1 besides, just a simple defense. Because if we don't make a threat, I think black's is simply just going to push this pawn. And then that doesn't really weaken. What I'm saying is we're not going to have any zugzwangs here because black can't really weaken his position if he can still move this pawn. But now that I just said the word zug out loud, maybe I have some other ideas. So let's see. Yeah, so the Knights is getting started. If any of you are playing in that, you should probably head on over. If you want to stick it out with me till the end, let's see what we can do here. So let's say queen f3, king b8, and now my new idea is to stop any checks black might have. So if I play queen f3, king b8, and I play, let's say, king h6, black now has to make a move. Now I'm noticing maybe just queen b6, and there's no way, you know, black is really going to be in zugzwang. Difficult stuff. Okay, I now see the point of queen c1. Queen c1 was actually a very deep idea. Well, it wasn't that deep. But it is an interesting idea, more interesting than I gave it credit for. So queen c1, we actually are making a threat. Our threat is queen h1, and then after king b8, the only move, queen h8 checkmate. So on queen c1, what queen h3, maybe black would have, you know, an f3 in defense somehow. So let's see, queen c1, f3, queen h1. That runs into, you know, queen e3 check. We can't really allow that. Interesting. So yeah, I think this f3 move might shut down the queen c1 idea.
Then looking at queen c6, then queen f6, and then queen h1.
So I'm sorry, what
Same idea.
would you say?
Queen f6 with the idea of queen h1.
Queen f3, you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so yeah, queen f3, king b8, queen h1. That's interesting. So it threatens checkmate, and it's stopping this king a8 move that gave him the queen b8 move to block our check. So queen f3, king b8. Sorry, someday. Queen h1. And now let's see how black can try to defend. So off the top of my head, looks like he has a check with a knight e6 move. So knight e6 check. What's the most convenient way for us to escape? Probably it's not going to be king f6, because then there's a queen d4 check, which picks up our knight, maybe. Maybe it doesn't, actually.
You take the pawn and challenge the knight.
Yeah, you could take the pawn, but that runs into more checks. Which is, I hate getting checked. I hate this puzzle. Terrible pick, Ben Simon.
Glad I could help.
He gets his queen on a6, he can block your h8 check. If he can manage that.
If you can do it?
Queen a6. Or if he can get his queen on a6, he can block that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, he can actually block because this knight is helping to support this square. So, you know, our queen would be able to capture there. It's an interesting idea, though, trying to get the queen around to block. So Ryan Murphy has some interesting suggestions. Let's take a look at what he has to say. So queen f3, king b8, queen b3, king a8, check, 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 uncheck rather, queen a2, queen g2, king b8. Queen h1, followed by queen h8. So this is the same position that we just achieved after, after queen f3, immediately followed by queen h1. He went the long way around. But he was also worried about an f3 move somewhere. But yeah, I think the only problem with this line is this knight e6 move. So if we can solve knight e6 check, then I think we've found the answer to the study. So let's see. So queen f3, king b8, queen h1, knight e6 check. Where do we want to put our king? If we go to f6, there's this queen d4 check move. But then, you know, maybe we can just capture this knight on e6. It's not entirely obvious to me. So knight e6, let's go with the least, you know, natural move. King g6, it's not the least natural, but it runs into more knight checks after a knight f8. And then when the knight's on f8, it's already blocking our queen h8 move, and I don't really like that. Don't really like the looks of that. Well, we're just about out of time here, actually. So we might have to ask for some help. Maybe I'll read the solution and give you guys some hints. Let's see. Taco Bell at 6 has an idea. This idea is queen f3, king b8, queen b3, king a8, queen g8, queen b8, queen a2, queen a7, queen g2, king b8, queen b2 check, king a8, queen h8 check, queen b8, queen a1 check. Oh, that's very nice. He does everything with check. I skipped like half your variation.
Ryan is not pleased.
I think this might be the same variation Ryan gave. Okay, so this might be the answer though. So this is actually very interesting. I'll let you take your picture.
Got it.
So check, king b8, check, king a8, check, queen b8, check, queen a7, check, king b8, check, king a8, check, queen b8, check, queen a7, check, king b8, queen h8 mate. So yeah, this is a super interesting idea. So he does everything with check, and then he gets there in the end. And of course, you know, if this happens, we have a variety of ways to win, not the least of which is this fork. But as you know, Ryan pointed out himself, there is this f3 move to try and slow us down. But yeah, I think the beauty of this composition is we can actually just take this, and then after king back to b8, we can go through the same rigmarole.
The idea is checking to slowly push yourself out into the corner.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to, you know, achieve queen h1 all over again. And so eventually we do get there, which I guess is forcing a knight d5 move. And then, let's see. It looks as though we have the same tactic here with knight b5. So kudos to Ryan Murphy. Kudos to Ryan Murphy. And Taco Bell at 6, who I'm sure also got there independently. But yeah, super interesting puzzle. Really quick, we're already over time, but let's check if we're correct. Puzzle 2044. Let's see. Yeah, queen f3, queen b3, queen g8, queen a2, queen g2, king b8, queen b2, queen a8, queen h8, queen a1, queen h1, f3 takes, and then you repeat the same line. So yeah, awesome job, guys. You found it, and I didn't. Yeah, super cool geometry, but yeah. So these are one way I like to train calculation, and it's a super interesting and aesthetic way to look at chess in kind of a new light, not a practical light, but you know, kind of a beautiful light. And so this is something you know you can spend your time on. Like I said, Domination and 2545 Endgame Studies by Kasparian. Super interesting book, and a super interesting class, hopefully. So thanks for joining me, guys, and I'll see you next week on the road to 2000.